All right, folks. So this is looking at some possible approaches for the messenger assignment. All right. And ultimately, as with all of the tasks we've done so far, it's about having that clear connection between theme and technique. And like we've talked about, demonstrating that you know what the author is doing. Okay. Not losing track of the characters and starting to talk like they're real people, making sure you're talking about what Markus Zusak is doing. That is one really strong benefit that people have found of actually doing the presentation as Markus Zusak, because then you almost don't need to think about it too much while you're doing it, because as long as you're talking about technique, you're talking about what Markus Zusak did, if that makes sense. But yeah, always looking at what he as the author did. So I think we talked a bit about needing to have an overarching theme. This is one that's worked well in the past, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. Okay, we all think it's kind of fair enough to say that that's a very key theme of the book. All right, that even in ordinary things, or more importantly, things that look ordinary, we find extraordinary things. Okay, and that's really told through the story of Ed. I don't know why that says how Ned sees himself, because his name's Ed. Anyway, it's on the film now for posterity. So, Ned Flanders, that's right. So, an approach that people have used that's worked well in the past is to set up each, so you've got that overarching topic and then broken it up into three kind of subcategories. And these categories can work really well. Is that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. All right. And I don't think we'd need to try hard at all to come up with a bunch of good examples of that from the text. Okay. So in the presentation, there's a really good chance you might start talking about stuff that's happening in the beginning of the novel, how Ed sees himself, which we're talking about today is really that narrative point of view, the setting, okay, his ordinary run-of-the-mill town, the symbolism of vacant taxis, okay, and we only touched on it there, but these ones here are sort of examples like that symbolism. Some people at the end, some people talk about Marv's car in there as well as like another example of the same thing, okay? So we'll look at that in more detail, but we can see there how in that section we could easily put together a couple of minutes. I think I know in here people could easily put together a minute and a half talking about those sorts of things and find some good things in the text. An opportunity to talk about symbolism has come up really nicely through the different stories and the different characters that Ed interacts with. Okay, and as you can see here, again, a sub-theme too, find it extraordinary in the ordinary, could be this one here, small gestures can have a big impact. Okay, because each of those things that we've talked about, the shoeless girl, the Tapatoo family, the mum with the ice cream, Miller and her lost husband, okay, each of those stories, Ed has a small gesture which makes a really big impact, and there's a really nice link with the symbolism, okay, lots of characterization. Characterization should be up here as well, okay. And this is where we talked kind of pretty briefly, but about the religious imagery, okay. So you could write a whole bunch on that if that's what you're interested in doing, but even if you're only interested in a little bit, it is a nice thing to add as part of your argument, because that religious imagery, the stuff about Ed being a saint and the cross strapped to his back and all those sorts of things, kind of play into elevating his story up to more than just about him. It sort of shows that, you know, it's a story about life and the universe and all those sorts of things, these universal themes. And how, with these, even just with these small gestures, he's having a big impact. That's why that religious imagery connects really well in the section. And potentially, there's real scope maybe even to talk about that dark and lightness in here as well, because lots of the people he's sort of bringing into the light, okay? I'd actually say that this section here, the imagery, darkness and light, if you want to write about that, that could also go really well in this section down here in the section, okay? But can we see there that if you're thinking about a 6-minute presentation, okay, so about a minute and a half on ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things, at a minute and a half on small gestures having a big impact. Okay. Again, this is a potential structure. Okay, for those when you're thinking about how you might going about doing it. And then this is the one that we just touched on. Okay, which is in the case of a book, something that could be considered an ordinary object, okay, something that someone's sitting down and written, all those sorts of things, can actually achieve extraordinary things because even though it's a fictional story, it can impact the real world, okay? And most of the time, when we're talking about these sorts of analysis, we'd say to really keep yourself out of it. And you certainly wouldn't want to have a whole bunch of stuff on yourself in this one here. But because Zusak, and because this is an oral presentation, because Zusak introduces himself to the novel and basically states that the novel is designed for the reader to understand that point, then it does allow some sort of opportunity to actually have that interaction between either your response to it, okay, or what Markus Zusak wants the response to be. So this is these things. This is a metafiction like we were talking about. So the power of fiction to transform the real world. If you wanted to write about this topic, you'd need to write about the metafiction, okay? Fiction that comments on itself, Markus Zusak being in the novel, okay? It's also that there are fictional texts that inspire Ed throughout as well, okay? So we see that kind of built into it. Could be the symbolism of the cards. And this word here, from the most reliable source in the universe, Wikipedia, is Deus Ex Machina, okay? This is a bit like mise en scène, okay? One of those words that kind of sounds like what's Mr. Heathcote talking about when he says it the first time. But once you know what it means, if you use it once or twice in your work, it adds a really sophisticated vocabulary to what you're saying, okay? So Deus Ex Machina, as it says there, means God from the machine. And it's evolved to mean a plot device where a seemingly unresolvable problem is suddenly and abruptly resolved by the inspired and unexpected intervention of some new event, character, ability, or object. So can we see how having Markus Zusak at the end of the book is actually a really good example of a Deus Ex Machina? Because when we're reading the book all the way through, we're trying to work out who's the person sending the messages. And I don't know about you, but the closer I got to the end of the book, I'm thinking, this doesn't actually make sense. Like, it can't possibly just be it can't be Audrey, or it can't be his dad, or it can't be something like that. So I'm like, I've no idea how they're going to resolve this. But the Deus Ex Machina, okay, actually having that newly introduced plot device, the plot device being Markus Zusak being the one sending the messages. All right. And the really interesting thing about that, and I think why it works well, okay, because Deus Ex Machina can kind of be a bit of a controversial thing to use in novels. But I think why it works really well is because it actually embodies the whole notion of the game. And in fact, and the cards, but the whole thing is a game, and that just as in real life playing games, the Joker can sort of turn a game on its head, or a Joker can change what everybody else was thinking. So Markus Zusak plays the Joker card, okay, which is, remembering this is in the Joker section of the book. He plays that Joker card on us, okay, and changes our whole perspective, forces us to look at it as a work of fiction and understand how we actually are in real life. And I've heard quite a few people say, I found this book quite, motivating. It's got really positive messages and things like that. Well, that's what fiction does, okay? That's why a big part of why we spend a lot of time in school and universities and in real life talking about fiction and looking at fiction and engaging with fiction is because even though they're made up stories, they actually help us understand truths about the world, okay? And in here, could definitely look at Ed's transformation, okay? That Ed's transformation represents the reader's potential transformation. All right, so just like Ed, It doesn't matter what cards we're dealt, okay? We're not trapped in a certain place. We have opportunities. It's what we do and what we make of them, okay? Knowing what happens if we get good opportunities, but also knowing if bad things happen, that isn't the be all and end all. There's a way that we'll be able to make it through in the end. So, as you can see there, if you're thinking about this as in an essay structure, this is an oral presentation. We'll talk more about the specifics of the oral presentation. But if you were thinking about this like an essay structure, we could see you've kind of got three key themes and then the techniques that go along with it. And the really cool thing here, because every single time you look at your marking criteria, you're required to engage and talk about techniques, use techniques, demonstrate an understanding of techniques. In this one here, without trying very hard, because this is just the ideas we came up with class. I just typed up what we came up with as a class. We've actually got a whole range of techniques without even having to try all that much. All right? We're not just talking about symbolism all the way through. We're talking about a range of techniques and demonstrating our understanding. Okay. So we'll look more at the specifics of the actual oral presentation next week.